Hey there, horror fans! Welcome to episode 98 of Funny Books Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorDNA.com. I'm your host, James Ferguson. This week's guest is Michael Moreci, the co-writer of The Plot, coming soon from Vault Comics. Michael wrote this with Tim Daniel as part of Vault's new annual horror imprint, Nightfall. I got a look at the first issue, and it's pretty awesome. There's already some great buzz about it, too, so be sure to check it out when the first issue debuts on September 25th. I've followed Michael's career for some time. He first popped up on my radar with Hoax Hunters, a series he co-wrote with Steve Seeley a few years ago. Since then, he's played in the sci-fi/horror space with some great titles like Roche Limit, Burning Fields, and a personal favorite, Curse. Michael can be found at his official website, michaelpmoreci.com. And be sure to sign up for his email newsletter, too, because he's got some great stuff there. He's also on Twitter and Instagram as Michael Moreci. In show news, I already have the next couple episodes recorded, and they'll be released shortly, along with a special guest for episode number 100. In comic book terms, I believe that makes it a collector's item, so stay tuned for more. And speaking of show stuff, I'd like to thank R. Grayson for leaving a great 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Reviews and ratings really help spread the word about the show, so if you get a chance, please swing over to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Stitcher and leave a review. Thank you. That's it for the news and updates this time around, so here's episode 98 of Funny Books Splatter with my guest, Michael Moreci. All right, let's dive right in. How would you describe The Plot to somebody? I guess it's just so you like. It almost sounds ridiculous. But how do you describe The Plot? But no, that's the title of the book we're talking about. Let's start there. And how would you pitch the book to somebody?
It is the title of the book, yeah, The Plot, coming from Vault Comics in September, and I describe it as a vintage haunted house story with twists that we've never seen before. And I love haunted house stories, so I say that from having pretty solid knowledge. But its backbone is in familial horror. It's about a guy named Chase Blaine, who after his brother is murdered, he inherits his brother's two kids, Zach and Mackenzie. And along with the two kids, he moves back to their familial home on the East Coast in Maine. And once they get there, they start to learn that their shared family history is not what they had seen, not what they had thought it was, and what they thought was mental illness is something much more. I mean, there is mental illness. We're not taking that. We're not cavalier about that. But it's something much deeper and goes very weaves its way through the roots of their entire family lineage.
Yeah, you were kind enough to share a glimpse of the first issue before we chatted here, and it is a very unsettling kind of quality, and that the horror kind of creeps in, and like you don't know what to expect at times. So it very much gets under your skin. So well done on that front.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, that's my favorite horror, is horror that's intimate. I like intimate horror. I like character-driven horror, and that's what we are aiming to achieve in this book, achieve in The Plot. We're lucky. We were guided by our editor, Adrian Wassel, who just in general is a great editor, but also he is a massive horror fan. So he brought a lot of keen instinct to it in terms of the scares. He actually had us tone back, and I say we, Tim Daniel and I, who I co-write this, like tone stuff back. So he's like, have some, on a scale of 1 to 10, have some 4 scares in there alongside the 8 scares. And he's totally right. He was totally right. And that what we ended up with was the quality that you see, that permeating underneath the skin.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that kind of horror as well, of this kind of unease that kind of sets in over time, where it's one thing to like have, you turn the page, oh, there's a crazy shit, here's a crazy thing. You could do that, and there's certainly a market for that, but that there's something to be said for this kind of, like, I'm gonna, right from page 1, there's something off, and you're never like completely on your have like sure footing as you're reading a book like that, and when you're kind of dreading to turn the page, you don't know what's going to come through, and I like the idea of you kind of deciding the different levels of horror there. Like, well, is this a 4 or an 8? How do we do that?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's the same way I feel. I think that like you get that impact when you're invested in the characters, because you're right. There could be, your Saws, your Hostels, or whatever, that kind of thread of the horror genre. And there's nothing at all wrong with that in any way, but that's not what the story is. Those stories are more about like, it goes from 9 to 10 to 15 to, and that's how those scares work, is by upping the ante. Our scares work by having a constant simmer. And the way you build a simmer is that you have that sense of dread, and then you have mixed with the investment in the character. So not only do you not know what, like you say, what could happen at any point, but you also don't want anything to happen at any point.
Right.
So you combine those two things, and then when something does happen, it's really unnerving.
Mm-hmm. I like the term you use, the simmer. I'm gonna have to remember that, because that is a very good explanation for it. I also like just thinking about the way that you describe the book. Like, under other circumstances, this could be seen as one of those, like, this gruff guy learns how to love when these two kids are foisted upon him. Like, it's you can see like Sinbad or The Rock starring as Chase, as he figures out life and what's most important in the world, and but obviously that is not the case here with some of the elements that are at play with this book.
No, not at all. But I like you went to Sinbad though. That was
like, what's like a goofy guy that would be in like one of those like cheesy dad comedies, and it's like, yeah, Sinbad was my frame of reference. I should probably update that. Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Now, this is part of Vault's new annual Halloween event that they're putting together called Nightfall. Like, how did this, like, did the plot come first? Did they approach you going, we want to do this horror thing every year? And did you pitch the plot, or did you come to them with this and it was like, this is a perfect fit, let's make this whole kind of thing?
It was a combination of the two. Tim and I work, we collaborate pretty hand in hand, whether it's just, he's designing my books, or we're co-writing books, or he's just kind of like, overlooking, various Vault things. And he wanted to do a horror line, and I wanted to like explore that with him. Vault's focus was primarily sci-fi fantasy, but he wanted to find a way to carve out this niche to do something horror, which Vault's became Nightfall. So he came. Both of us went to Adrian and Damien, who are basically they are Vault, and had both the idea and the plot. Hand in hand. We're like, we can do this, carve it out this way, carve out this line this way, and here's what one of the books would look like. And like I said, Adrian is a big horror fan. Damien is also a big horror fan. So it was a pretty easy sell to get them on board. And before we knew it, we had this book up and going, and Vault had a couple other books that were that met this criterion that they didn't know what to do with, but want to do something with nonetheless. So, this pop-up line was born.
That's awesome. So and I'm a big admirer of what Vault has been doing over the past few years, because it's given a home to, as you say, primarily some sci-fi and fantasy stuff. There has been like some horror or horror adjacent items that have popped in there, and it's really been I found that maybe a couple years ago there was like a big influx in the indie scene with this kind of with this stuff, and it kind of died down to an extent. And now, like, seeing something like Vault come in, and it's like, no, these voices deserve to be heard, these stories deserve to be told, and it's been making a fantastic mark in the industry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And they're leading. They're right now, I think, a pioneer of indie books and how many good ones they put out. And yeah, this is kind of prime for them. They do have a lot of horror very close. These Savage Shores is vampires. Even the book that I have coming out right before the plot is Maul, which is a horror in the way that like Escape from New York is sort of horror, horror sci-fi. Then I'm writing with Gary Dauberman, who's obviously a name that most horror people will know. He's written both It movies, he directed and wrote the latest Annabelle. So they've been circling around this stuff. Their latest Resonant, which came out I think last week or 2 weeks ago, it was great. It was great. Yeah, I loved it. That was excellent. David Andry was just did a great job, and Ellie Aragon is a great artist. So yeah, I mean they're doing great books. Vault always sees the forest for the trees. That's one of the things I love about them, and they don't get caught up with, they don't get dissuaded from their mission, and their mission is to put out great original titles, and they're not crazy, going crazy trying to get IPs or trying to get, superstar creators. Their focus is on the work. It's about the quality, and that is what's going to, win the day for them. And they're doing
100%. It. Now, your approach, I'm curious to hear your approach to some of these titles, because as you said, you're co-writing this book with Tim Daniel. You have The Mall, which is co-written, and then you have something like Wasted Space, which is all your own. Like, how do you approach the co-writing process versus something that you write on your own? And then, I guess, how do you decide what to co-write? Is it more of like an idea that is being created with multiple people there?
It all depends on how the opportunity arises, really. Wasted Space has, always been my baby, since from the start. And that's a book that's, both plot and Wasted Space. I don't want to say one is and isn't in my wheelhouse. They both very much are. But Wasted Space was mine from the start. And Maul was something that came to me, thankfully, through Vault. I guess they had shown different work to Gary. This is Gary's idea. Like Maul is Gary's idea, to give full credit. And they've shown him, I guess, different samples, different writers, and luckily, thankfully, he chose me. And with Gary, the partnership is less intense because Gary is very, very busy. So basically, he gave me the idea. We talked about story, we kind of talked about bigger picture stuff. And then I went off and, would write an issue and send it to him. And, we'd go back and forth pretty loosely. It was cool. He gave me two great things. He gave me a great idea and worked it out with me, and then gave me the freedom to execute it, and then his guidance, where with Tim, and the plot, that was more of like an organic thing. Like, he had this kind of like cool image of like these skeletons made of a tree, and skeletons making a tree, and he wanted to tell some sort of familial horror. He sent me this image, and I was like, yeah, there's something, and I thought about it for a while, and he thought about it, and we kind of started just volleying these ideas, and eventually the ideas became a thing, and we developed it, we built it together. It was a total, and continues to be a total collaboration, where we're actually, breaking each issue together, splitting the duties of the script, 50-50, reading each other's stuff and offering notes. So that was a real, like, true collaboration, where Gary and I, it's a little bit looser. I can't say which is better or worse, like, they both produce, I'm lucky to be working with good people on both sides, and I think they're both producing good work. So, you never look a gift horse in the mouth, and just kind of roll with it. If it's working, you just roll with it.
Well, I think you and Tim have go back a few years as well, between some of the work that you did at Boom, like Curse and Burning Fields, that definitely stood out. So clearly, like, you're right in that it does produce. So you guys know how to make some pretty good comics and good horror comics at that. So it definitely fits. There is a nice little wheelhouse there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've been lucky, like, we embarked on Curse, and Curse did well, and we did Burning Fields, and I still have a sore spot for Burning Field. I think it was a great book, but I don't think, like, market, it didn't perform that well. I think it was like personally, I think it was like just like a year too early. I still, it's like the one that got away. I'm like, oh man, because I think it's going to Colin and Riley's.
Oh my God, yeah,
good. I think it's. Yeah, so But that's just sort of what
comics.
happens sometimes. But I still love that book. That's comics, So yeah, but now we're at it again.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, the plan for the plot, is that like a self-contained story, as well as that the idea that like each one of these kind of Nightfall events would be its own self-contained thing?
Yeah, that's more or less the case. Like we have it plotted for 8 issues. They're all 8 oversized issues. They're all like at least 26 to 30 pages, somewhere around there. So they're big issues. There's 8 in total, and that would probably. I mean, we've toyed with the idea there could be an open-endedness to like an anthology of this, but this particular story is kind of like Hill House, where Hill House is going to be this anthology thing. There's possibilities for that, but right now, for where we land, the story of Chase Blaine and Mackenzie and Zach and that familial stuff will reach a solid conclusion by the end.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you do a great job in introducing the world and these characters pretty quickly. So, and there's like just that right amount of mystery to it that like, oh, there's something here. What is going on here? And trying to like pick that apart. So that's why I'm like, all right, is this something you could probably spend countless issues exploring all these different the mythos between whatever these this haunted house and this familiar history is, but hearing that it's like, yeah, there's going to be a self-contained beginning, middle, and end kind of thing, there's definitely a place for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's the steady hand of Adrian. I think that like we could have gone longer. I could see this being 10 or 12 issues. But I'm glad that we're keeping it succinct. Like I said, they're still bigger issues, so it's almost is kind of, 4 extra pages over 8 issues is probably another issue, at least four extra pages. So it's probably technically a standard issue. It's more like 10 issues, right, of material. But like, I'm glad we're keeping it like this, and I'm glad the issue is what it is. I think like a younger me would have had more kind of shock and awe in a first issue. But he kind of said like, he let this simmer, like he's like, this is how we're going to do this, and make it a more just a confident issue rather than a bombastic issue. And I'm really glad with the creative decisions that he led us toward.
Yeah, it's saying something like to have that kind of steady hand involved. Like I have, you just said like if you were younger you would have made different choices there. So is that like kind of the difference between like, I guess, starting on your own, doing like creator-owned work where you're kind of you and the creative team are the only people there, and then having an editor like this that is so I guess helpful in just even story guidance? Is that like kind of like the tipping point, or like the big difference between like, I guess, where you're at now versus where you were at before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I look back and there's always things like, don't get me wrong, like I'll be very clear before I say anything. Like the editorial team, Eric and Chris on Curse and Burning Fields were excellent, and that's why those are some of, in my opinion, my best work, because we had great editors.
I praised Curse like a couple weeks ago, so I was doing like a big rundown on Twitter of like horror comic recommendations, and Curse was like one of the first ones that I threw up there, because I'm like, yeah, people should still read this book. It's a terrifying werewolf book.
Oh man, I appreciate it. It's funny. I had a meeting this week or last week with Blumhouse talking about some stuff, and they had a time, and this is all. This option is public, but they had optioned
awesome.
Curse. And I didn't realize how close it was. I was meeting with one of the producers there, Ryan, and Ryan was like, it was real close. And basically, there was a star attached. I don't know if this was public, so I can't say who, but there was a star attached who was doing a lot of genre work, and then he decided he didn't want to do genre work anymore, and he left. And that was
That'll do it.
That'll do it. He's like, but he was like, it was going, like it was happening, and then this certain person dropped out, and it all fell apart. And I was like, oh shit.
So can I ask? Sorry, real quick. So does that, like, what happens in that case? Like, do they still have the option? Like, would they try to shop it around to like another actor or something?
No, they had a 6-month option, and or maybe it was a year. I forget. one of the two, and by the time it's a long, these are long, slow, grinding gears to get one thing to the other. By the time they had this actor and lost this actor, it was basically that was the time. That was the time they had, and they were never able to. They didn't think they could get it out without him. So the rights went back to Boom, and I don't know what's happening.
Well, I guess that's the good thing and the bad thing with something with rights like that, because you get to sell it twice. So something like that, it's like, all right, yeah, well, all right, you didn't get to make it. That's a bummer, but you could shop it around again and see what else is out there. But
yeah. I mean, I still have hope for it. I definitely still have hope. I want to there's so many horror, filmmakers I want to call and be like, make this, Jesus, it's perfect for to be made. I mean, Burning Fields is sprawling and big and expensive, but Curse is a $2 million horror
close
movie,
and personal, and a lot of it takes place in like a basement, so you're able to play around with that kind of stuff. But I'm sorry, so I sidetracked you a little bit. So that was we were talking about the editor and the involvement, and yes, Boom was certainly very helpful in the editing there. But what's the vibe like now versus where you were before, I guess?
Oh yeah, it's different. I look at then and now, and I look at stuff like Hoax Hunters is a book that I loved writing, but I look at it and it could have been way better. I had no editor. It was my first real attempt at doing a long form comic. I think we went for 20 issues, more than 20 issues, something like that.
I think you had like 12 at Image, and then you had some over at Heavy Metal too, right?
Yeah, let's see. I think I had 14 Image plus the annual, the case files. I think it was 15. Or maybe there was an issue 0 too, so maybe it was 15, 16, something like that, because there's 3 volumes. And then there was 5 at Heavy Metal for sure. So there's somewhere in that ballpark. But yeah, that, could have been stronger, Roche Limit, which is still I love, but also probably could have been stronger and more focused. I'm lucky. I feel like it's taken me a while to learn how to do comics. I am still learning how to do comics, but I feel like I'm in the best professional place I've been in terms of clarity, in terms of working with good people, in terms of being judicious about what I do and what I don't do. And this is stuff you only kind of get with experience. Some people get it a lot sooner. But I've got it. I feel like when I've got it, and it's a pretty cool place to be, and doing good work like Maul or Plot or Wasted Space, or I'm doing a book with Axel Alonso's company, Archangel 8, and I'm learning a ton from Axel. So it's all a learning process, but it's a good process.
Aside from getting a good editor and surrounding yourself with good people, what's one piece of advice you would give to yourself when you were starting out a few years back?
The advice I would give myself is to not rush. I feel like there was a time when I was younger, and this is, Hoax Hunters is almost 7 years ago, something around there, 7 or 8. And I felt like everything had to happen now. I had to take whatever came my way, and I just didn't allow myself the time to really, I'll use the word again, be judicious about what I did and how I did it, and I think I would like to go back and to be more careful with things and realize that it's not about quantity. It's not about how many editors you can forge relationships, or it's how many people can, you can get your book in front of. It's about quality. It's about quality of all things. And not only is my relationship with Vault, in terms of, Damien and his editorial skills and everything that Damien does, which is also wonderful. Those guys we're really close friends, we have a great solid relationship, that I think that I know is going to last for a really long time. And we're going to continue to, push each other to do better. I'm invested in them, they're invested in me, and we share the same goals, and that's making really good comics and doing them the right way. And, those are the things I should have been striving for earlier, rather than, just trying to get everywhere. And it was I don't want to say it's a mistake, but it wasn't the best strategy, at least for me.
No, that makes sense, you know, and I think that kind of focus of get this one right instead of sending out, you know, 5 mediocre books. If you have one really great book, that's gonna stand out. And I'm so glad you
Totally.
you still look back on Hoax Hunters fondly, because that was such a great book. I love that book. That was where like you popped on my radar for that, and that was like a book that, like, sometimes I get inundated with books every week in terms of just like the reviewing stuff, and you know, sometimes a book will just come out with like not that much fanfare, and it's like, all right, I didn't like see a press release, I wasn't expecting this, but like this looks, you know, weird or spooky, I should check this out. And like that book just like hit me over the face, like, oh my god, this is awesome, this is a brilliant concept, like why aren't more people talking about this? So it was just kind of like banging that drum all of a sudden, like, no, we should be talking about this book.
Oh, yeah, no, and I remember that, dude. That's how we met. You know, I absolutely remember that, and I still kick around the idea of rebooting it. I still think like doing it, and I have some ideas. Like, it definitely could work. It still could be salient and scary and funny, and it's definitely on my mind, for sure. And I don't think we've seen
That's
the
great.
end of
I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, I remember, like, yeah, we met at a New York Comic-Con, and you and Steve had drew like this like bizarre image in my sketchbook of like, oh no, we're gonna do this. And it was like the Raven guy playing like chess against a giant raven. It was strange, but yeah, no, I definitely cherish it.
I remember
that.
That's that's awesome. Oh, I totally remember that, man. We Steve and I had a lot of good times, man. Touring around and making that book, it was a hoot. We had
great.
A blast.
I want to go back to the horror genre a bit, because you talked about your experience with the haunted house genre, and so like what kind of books or movies stand out for you as kind of pinnacles of that haunted house subgenre, and then I don't want to say influence, because I feel like that's such like the cheesy interview term, like, oh, how do you get the idea, or some nonsense like that. But you know, like, are there things that stood out that are like, this like, you know, was integral to like getting to this point? You know, if like you could trace back the origins of the plot back to, you know, like were you like, you know, in 5th grade and you happen to watch, you know, Amityville Horror or something like that, and you're like, this is where it comes back, this is where it comes from.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's so many. Let's see. How do I narrow this down? I mean, obviously there's the pillars like Shirley Jackson, which is a book that I've adored forever. It's just such a powerful, emotional, scary, psychological book. There is, I'm a big fan of books that came out in the paperback boom of like the 70s and 80s, like that horror post Stephen King, where there's just all these horror writers and paperbacks coming out all over the place, and they were all, well, maybe not all, a lot of them were really great. And you know, like Michael McDowell, and there's a book called Burnt Offerings by and it just got re-released from, do you know the Valancourt line?
No, I'll have to look it up.
Oh, dude, you gotta look it up. Valancourt they're re-releasing all these paperback horror. Doing really nice editions of them, and one of them was a favorite of mine, Burnt Offerings, from Robert Morasco, I believe his name, but it's a haunted house book that is excellent book. But yeah, Michael McDowell, you know, Cold Moon Over Babylon, The Elementals is a great haunted house book. You know, and the thing that these things all share in common, Sherry Priest wrote a haunted house book. Well, what's it called? It's a more contemporary one. Oh man, I'm drawing a blank, but Sherry Priest is the author, and she's great. But the thing that all these share in common is that they're deeply visceral books. They are like plot, like everything I was saying with plot, really rooted in the characters and their horror. I think it's kind of weird, like the demarcation between like what we expect out of horror. I think we saw on display in Mike Flanagan's Netflix Haunting of Hill House. And the reason I say that is because the ending of that, and I won't spoil it, but I'll be general as possible. But the ending of that, like, it was like divided right down the middle of people who just absolutely hated the ending and people who absolutely loved the ending. And I'm on the side I absolutely loved it, because the story all along was about, to me, the horror I was looking for was about like character horror, the trauma of these characters and their grief and this thing that happened in their past with their mother and their father. And like, that is the horror. That is the scariest thing about there. I mean, granted, it had other great scares and great texture. There's so many wonderful things about that, but the core was about these characters and the emotions and all that. The people who didn't like it weren't expecting that. They were looking for more of the jump scares. They were looking for more like, why is the house haunted? You know, why do the family seemingly have these kind of loose kinetic, you know, powers and abilities, stuff like that. They were looking for that resolution. And when that's not the resolution that the show offered, it offered an emotional closure, an emotional resolution. That's why I loved it. But I can see, depends on what you're looking for. But that is a great example of something that's truly influential. Lock and Key, you know, which is, again, rooted in characters and their experience, their grief, and you know, their trauma, and moving beyond that, and how a place can be representative of so many deeper things, and so, you know, histories and character relationships, and all of this, you know, past and present colliding all in this singular location.
Yeah, I think the Lock and Key is a fantastic example of this. And now, selfishly, you see one of the reasons why I do the show is that I can get recommendations for other things to read and watch. So now I'm just like checking notes, like, okay, Burnt Offerings, got it. I have to check with my editor. He covers the book site. Like, I so often, like, thank God so just in echoing your sentiment about having a good editor, I don't watch as many horror movies as I probably should, but I'm like, you know, neck deep in horror comics. So occasionally I'll make a statement in a review saying like, hey, this is, you know, I've never seen anything like this before. And he's like, actually, here are 6 movies that have done that. And like, so maybe revise this statement so you don't look like an idiot. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks. Like, so I definitely appreciate a good editor on that front, but he handles a lot of the book side of the site. So I'm curious. He's probably all over this. So that's the thing, for something like Burnt Offerings and was it Valiant Court?
Okay. Valancourt, yeah. Okay. He'll know Valancourt for sure. I mean, they have this line now that's like called Paperbacks from Hell, which is like based off of Grady Hendrix' Paperbacks from Hell. Did you ever hear of that?
So that's like my like gateway in was you know, that like just like many folks with Stephen King, and like I kind of like dabbled in that, flew into like Dean Koontz for like a hot minute, and then it was just like kind of grabbing almost at random with stuff. So and then I kind of like dove into the comics thing a few years back, and now I'm just like immersed in that world and trying to like come up for breath every so often and be like, oh, this is something that matters that I need to really be aware of, and trying to ingest that to make sure I'm a little more well-rounded, which is easier said than done.
Oh, it totally is. Comics alone will keep you very, very occupied.
Now, so I think now, and also like just a quick sidebar, I'm about a third of the way through Black Star Renegades on Kindle right now, so like I picked that up and just like it was one of those things like, all right, it's sitting here, I finally need to read this, so like completely separate, but I started reading that before we were going to chat, but it was just one of those things and trying to fit it in and when I can read it. So it's a pretty good you know, completely obviously separate. It's in the sci-fi genre, but like really cool stuff, man. Like I'm excited to see where this book goes.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it's a fun space opera, you know. It's like a Star Wars-esque space adventure that heavy on the fun, you know, obviously attention to care to characters and to spectacle, but you know, I just wanted to do something, and my editor both and I set out for this that's like fun, like a fun romp. You know, so many space operas now, while I love and read them, are so serious and so concerned with science and politics and and like all that stuff's cool, but like there's also, hey, let's just have some people, you know, it's a galactic war and it's crazy shit happens and whatever. You know, like
that's all you need sometimes. You know, we don't need a repeat of Phantom Menace. You need you don't need to talk about the, you know, trade deals and stuff like that. You need to be able to get in there and get to the reason why that you care about that kind of stuff in the first place is, you know, fun characters doing fun things out there in space, and the same thing can apply for just about any genre. But yeah,
totally. Yeah, it's just that pulp tradition, the pulp tradition of both sci-fi or horror, you know, where it's just a little, I don't want to say simpler, but like just a little bit more boiled down to basics.
Now, that actually brings up a good point, though. Like, how do you decide between... All right, so you've written novels, you've written comics. Like, how do you decide if you get an idea, like, this would be a good comic, this would be a good novel, this would be, which is the best medium for something like this?
That's something I struggle with all the time, because I have doors, gratefully, I have doors open to both. There are some times where something could be, people say like, oh, something's a book, it's a comic, that's not true. Plot could have been a book, easy. Like, plot could have easily been a book, because the way it developed and because certain things I wanted to do and Tim wanted to do, obviously, it became a comic book, and I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that it's a comic. I lose nothing in the negotiation between where to go. But it's, I try to right now, not only picking the right projects, picking the best projects for myself, and what I want to do and what I can do. It is sort of seeing what can work best for the medium, like if I have like 4 projects, that I'm interested in pursuing and developing, it's like, okay, well, this is a good fit for Vault because X, Y, and Z. And I have my book editor who's looking for this type of book, and I know this will satisfy him. So it's also, you don't want to just make decisions based on what other people expect of you or what they want, but being realistic, you also have to kind of meet people at least a little bit where they are, in order to, you give them what they want, and ultimately you're doing what you want because it's a project that you have decided to pursue in one form or another. So it's a little bit of a negotiation, a little bit of a compromise, but it's just about finding the right projects, the right homes.
And I guess something like a novel is just you, versus having a good creative team around you is necessary for comics, because you're going to need an artist, a colorist, a letterer, etc. So what kind of resources do you have available, and how do those kind of things come about can also help dictate that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And excuse me. That's the lucky thing with like you said, like with comics, it's a lucky thing that like Vault has a great Rolodex of artists, and they got Josh Hickson on plot and Zach Hartog on Maul, and like I'm fortunate to have such good collaborators. But when it's time for me to go off on my own, that's kind of cool too, to just go off and write a novel and kind of go on that journey by myself. That's why I'm kind of more particular about novels, because it's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, it's a lot more intensive of a process, and a lot more, it's a solitude, a solo for sure process. So, just want to make sure I'm doing the right things.
It makes sense. And I guess that having the balance between the two probably helps, in that, like, you can have the introvert versus the extrovert, depending on, how much collaboration you want to do in a given time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's definitely key to it.
Cool. So I don't have much else for you, Michael, but I think I like I said, in seeing at least the work in progress for the plot number 1 is definitely filled me with anticipation with it, and it's if this is how you're starting, I'm very curious as to how this is gonna bob and weave throughout the storytelling process. So you definitely left a mark. So I'm very much excited. Do you know when the actual first issue is coming out?
I do. Let me check my case. I think it's the last Wednesday in September. I can actually open up my calendar. I can tell you it is the 25th. September 25th is the date.
So mark your calendars, but more importantly, pre-order that sucker at your local comic shop. So we'll have links to how to buy that in the show notes below, so if you're whatever thing you're listening to this on, I guess. But aside from pre-ordering the plot and checking out some of your other work, what are the best places to find you online?
I'm Twitter, Instagram, just Michael Moreci, Moreci. My website is michaelpmoreci.com. And that's about it.
All right, so again, look for the plot number 1 from Vault Comics on September 25th. And otherwise, that's it for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest, Michael Moreci.
You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorDNA.com. We have been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. If you like the show, please help me out by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to the show via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. I am always looking for new guests, so if you have a horror comic, I want to hear from you. I don't care if you're a seasoned pro or a first-timer. You could find me on Twitter as @JamesFerguson or via email at james@horrordna.com. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and so much more. Check us out at horrordna.com and @horrordna on Twitter.